like a picture of fire, because, you know, brass has the same color as fire. And so here we have a brazen serpent on a pole. And when Moses set that up, when the people looked on it, they were healed from the snake venom. Very, very important spiritual understanding that we're going to get into next week. And so Jesus said in John 3, you know where he says, for God so loved the world that he gave. You know what he said before that? As Moses lifted up the serpent in the wilderness, even so must the Son of Man be lifted up. Now, if this story did not happen the way God said it happened in Numbers, then the whole thing of Jesus is a myth and a lie, and it means absolutely nothing. But I believe it was real. Isaiah 14:29, rejoice thou not, thou whole Palestina, because the rod of him that smote thee is broken. For out of the serpent's root shall come forth a cockatrice, and his fruit shall be a fiery, flying serpent. Now remember, the word serpent relates to those of the reptilian world in the Scriptures. You have serpents, you have dragons and lizards. Even today, there is a gigantic lizard in an island somewhere off the Asian coast. I think it's on the Komodo Island, and it's referred to as the Komodo dragon. And this thing, it gets very large. It walks around on 4 feet. It has a long tail, it has a long leg, and it's got, you know, the tongue thing going out. And they refer to it as a Komodo dragon. I believe that it is a reptilian remnant of the things that people saw 1,000 years ago, 4,000 years ago, 5,000 years ago. I believe that those things existed exactly the way they were described. Here is an old description of a creature called the Werven holding a fleur-de-lis. Notice that it's a dragon creature, sort of like the Komodo dragon. The tongue coming out of its mouth, it probably breathes fire, and notice that it has wings. Here is another one here on a Korean textile. Notice the wings. Some say that might be fins. I'm not sure. You can imagine the idea. Now remember, dinosaurs means thunder lizards. And when they started digging all these creatures up, they realized that they were part of the reptilian kingdom. One of which was the flying types of dinosaurs, dino reptiles, pterodactyls, and one called Quetzalcoatlus. That's an interesting term, Quetzalcoatlus. Now I know the scientists named it after the myth, but since we've dug the bones up, I mean, you see the picture here of a pterodactyl or a Quetzalcoatlus, and here is the bones, the remnants, the fossilized remains of a giant flying serpent. I mean, think about what the Bible's telling you. The Bible was telling you that there were flying serpents among the people. And he referred to them as fiery flying serpents. And here are the fossilized remains of what could very well be exactly what God sent in among the people and what is being described in the Bible. And so, what I'm telling you is that all these creatures that everybody says, oh, that's a myth, it's a legend, it's not real. We have the bones of these animals laying around all over. They're in museums everywhere. The Quetzalcoatlus creature, here's its skeletal structure, was named after the, who was it, the Mayans or the Aztecs, who had the idea of a fiery flying serpent that was their god. It was called Quetzalcoatl. And their god disappeared, and they believed that their god was going to return. And so when Hernando Cortez landed in the halls of Montezuma, when he landed there, they thought that he was the return of their god. That's why he was able to hold power over them and do what he did. Okay? And so they believed that the stories were real of fiery, flying, reptilian-looking creatures. And it was their god. They referred to it as Quetzalcoatl. They carved its image on their temples. Here's one here. Here's another one at the base of a pyramid. When you look at this pyramid, this is called Chichen Itza. And Chichen Itza is famous because on the solstices, the summer solstice and so on the solstice, people gather from everywhere, and they go to this particular pyramid because it's designed in such a way, if you look at it, that when the sun hits at a particular point, Notice the shadows make the image of a reptile-like serpent or whatever that's descending down the staircase to the bottom, where you have the image of a dragon's head at the bottom. This is why this particular pyramid was designed this way, to give homage and obedience and worship to a fiery flying serpent that was their god, that they referred to as Quetzalcoatl. And I believe that they were real. I believe they were real. And men saw them and worshipped them. Now think about it. Here we have a real mystery creature from the Bible. It really existed. Man interacted with it, and man worshipped it. It was a god. Think about that as we head into next week. All right? Here's look at Isaiah chapter 30, verse 6. The burden of the beast of the south into the land of trouble and anguish, from whence cometh the young and old lion. Now I want you to notice I have these creatures underlined. Lion, viper, fiery flying serpent, asses, and camels. Well, let's look at this for a minute, because there would be people that say fiery flying serpents, that's just a myth. Well, in the same verse we have lions, we know they're real. Vipers, real. Asses, donkeys, real. Camels, you ever smoked one? Okay? They're real. In the midst of all four of these real creatures, in the same list, we have fiery flying serpents. The pterodactyl, the Quetzalcoatlus, or whatever it was. We have that, and they were real. And people saw them. They wrote about them in their stories and their fables. Thunderbirds. The Indians had ideas, had the myth of the thunderbird. That's what we're dealing with, a fiery flying serpent. And they were real. Now here's a good one here. This is, I'm going to kind of go out on an edge on this one. All right? This is, thus saith Mike Hoggard's imagination. I think they were real. I think they are. And I'll tell you what I'm describing. A satyr. S-A-T-Y-R. What is a satyr? We have the idea of, and I'll show you that graphic here in a little bit, half human, half furry goat or furry creature of some kind. The Hebrew word satyr just has the idea of something that's like a furry monster, is what it is, with a sort of a human shape. Let's read the scriptures, all right? Isaiah 13:21, but wild beasts of the desert shall lie there, and their houses shall be full of doleful creatures, and owls shall dwell there, and satyrs shall dance there. Notice we have owls and doleful creatures. They exist. But now we have satyrs mentioned here. Isaiah 34:14, the wild beasts of the desert shall also meet with the wild beasts of the island, and the satyr shall cry to his fellow, and the screech owl also shall rest there and find for herself a place of rest. So we have a couple places in the Bible that is using the word satyr to describe something, some sort of hairy, human-like creature. Kind of get where I'm going here? This has been a fascination of mine since childhood. Do you ask me if I believe them? Absolutely. I talked with a guy one time. He told me his story. That he used to live around Fort Smith, Texas, and he had a buddy that worked at a golf course, and they had ponds there. And at night, they used to go fishing in those ponds at night when all the golfers would go away. And he said he was going to meet his buddy there at the lake. And they came at night, and he was headed toward the lake, and he walked through the trees there on the golf course, and he came to a little clearing, and he said he stopped, and he saw something very large watching his buddy fishing. And when he walked into that clearing, that thing turned and bent down and looked him right in the eye, and he said he just stood there, froze for a minute, and then he run off. And the guy I talked to, he's a businessman. He's not some crazy kook looking for UFOs and all the stuff. And this guy was a successful businessman. And he said, I know what I saw. He said, scared the daylights out of me. Have no reason to believe that he's telling the truth or telling the lie. This is what he said. But the fact is that people again, civilization after civilization all around the world are telling a story of seeing a very large human-like creature full of hair. We refer to him in this country as Bigfoot. There is a Missouri version. He's called Momo, or the Missouri Monster, Momo the Monster. And I can tell you, when I was a child, I could hear things on the news about sightings of Momo the Monster, and we lived right, next to the woods, and I was scared to death that Momo was going to come out of the woods and get me. Things you think about when you're a child, right? The Patterson film. A lot of people have seen the Patterson film. It has been analyzed. There is a story that it's a hoax. I don't believe the story that it's a hoax. I have looked at this film. Others have looked at this film. People who are in the business of studying animals and creatures have examined this film. Those who work in the Hollywood gorilla suit business look at this film and say, this was done in the early 1960s by amateurs. We can just barely do something like this now with the technology we have. The Patterson film, if you've never seen it, was shot in the forest, I think, of northwest or northern California, somewhere around in there. And they saw a hairy creature walking away from them. And you remember that famous stride. And they also noted, as they examined the film, and you can see it clearly, that this creature was not a male. It was a female creature walking away from them. One guy actually does work with animals and things like that. He actually did measurements on the skeletal structure of the creature in the Patterson film and said that the bone structure inside of underneath this fur does not match the bone structure of a human being inside of a suit. So, that's my case. I believe that these creatures exist. I believe they exist in this country. They're up in Canada. We hear stories from around the world of these. The Australians have the yowie. Yeah, me and my mate saw a yowie the other night. Scared the daylights out of us. That's my worst Australian accent in the world, mates. But anyway, yowies, you Aussies know about yowies. In Nepal, in the Himalayas, they have the Yeti. Here is what some hikers hiking in Nepal said that they saw. They actually captured video of it. I believe they existed. I believe that they still exist. The American Indians, they referred to it as Sasquatch. They saw this creature and they had interactions with it. But we also have the possibility of a paleontological connection between a giant human-like hairy creature walking throughout in the wilderness, which, by the way, the Bible describes for you that the satyrs only exist in wilderness areas where no humans are. So far, the Bible is telling you of these creatures' nature. You and I both know that animals have a place where they like to live. We have a dog in our house, and our dog likes to live on our furniture. That's part of their nature. And according to the Bible, satyrs only live in places where human beings don't live. They don't like interaction with human beings. This is why it's so hard that so many people, most people don't see them. People who go into their habitat, into the woods, into the forest, into the wilderness areas, they would have interactions with them, and that's what the Bible's telling you. We actually have a creature that some